Do you know what I love? Found footage movies. That shouldn't come as a surprise. I had several of them on my top 10 horror list last year. And for those of you unfamiliar with the term, found footage refers to a style of recording where, instead of just showing a movie as staged events, the camera and the cameraman are part of the story. You might know them as mockumentaries, false home movies, things of that nature, and they're by no means a new concept. They've been around long before film. Dracula, for example, is a book written as a collection of letters, as though it was a found set of documents instead of an actual written narrative. And probably the most well-known non-film version of the medium would be Orson Welles' 1930s broadcast of War of the Worlds. Now granted, he didn't actually make his as a found footage thing, even though it was in the style of a news report, but he knew what he was doing, and he did it realistically in hopes of terrorizing the entire state of New Jersey, which he did successfully, because he's a just gosh darn little rascal. Now, the use in film is nothing new. Some of the early examples are movies like Cannibal Holocaust, which I do not recommend for the common viewer, or comedies like...
How much is
Just listen for a minute. The sustain, listen to it.
I'm not hearing anything.
You would, though, if it were playing.
But the style really hit its stride in the late 90s, early 2000s with movies like The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. When these movies are good, they're really good. They can be suspenseful, intense, they can blur that line between fact and fiction. I love them. Do you know what do I hate? Found footage movies. They're ugly, they're sloppy, the writing is garbage, it's way too easy to take you out of the moment, and it's way too easy for half-baked movies to get greenlit with the style. Audiences, like me, are kind of mixed on the genre. So regardless of how much audiences love found footage movies, studios love to make them. They're cheap. Look for example at Paranormal Activity. That was a small project movie with a budget of about $15,000. That is appallingly little, especially if you compare it to some of the big blockbusters, say for example The Avengers, which had a budget of about $220 million. Now, The Avengers did very well. It earned over $1 billion at the box office, earning more than 7 times what it cost to make. But Paranormal Activity, with a budget of $15,000, raked in $200 million. That means it earned almost 13,000 times the amount it cost to make. That is a lot of profit. So every movie studio on the planet started churning them out. Some got wide theatrical releases, like the continuations of the Paranormal Activity movies, but more, many more, took their very small budgets straight to video. And there are tons of these movies out there. Mostly horror, but also in comedies and sci-fi and adventure genres as well. And they range in subjects from aliens to Bigfoot to dinosaurs to Bigfoot to psychotic kids to Bigfoot to ghosts to Bigfoot. So why are people so split on this genre? What makes a good found footage movie good and a bad one less than good? What made Paranormal Activity a success while so many others were forgotten? Well, having Steven Spielberg screen your movie helps, but apart from that, I think there are some things that make a good found footage movie work, while it makes others just a little too absurd. I've seen the good ones, I've seen the bad ones, so here are my tips on making your mockumentary into a rockumentary. That was stupid. Can I do that again? No. Okay, fine. Doubling down. Mockumentary and a rockumentary. Cool. Sticking with it. Found footage movie. Number 1, keep it simple. The found footage movies that have found success up to this point didn't strain the imagination to believe. They can neglect a regular narrative for a world that's familiar and easy to relate to, making it easier also to get emotionally invested. We know the types of people in these movies. We know the situation in the world that they live in. We know the awkwardness of using or being in front of a camera. I mean, some people. I'm not awkward. It's easy to put ourselves in the situation and thus experience it the same way as the character. That's a little harder to deal with when, for example, you're dealing with a land of dinosaurs. We can't relate to dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs, but our world currently has no dinosaurs. Use a simple plot and you'll be able to pull the viewer in. You can't do that with dinosaurs. Even though dinosaurs are awesome, let me be clear. Wrong. Number 2. Don't connect the dots, aka show don't tell, aka don't show don't tell. Look, the bonus to a simple plot is that audiences should be able to figure out what's going on pretty easily. This is good, as getting out exposition and necessary context is difficult in any sort of film. It can easily sound forced and clunky.
Tell him about the Twinkie.
What about the Twinkie?
And it takes clever writing to pass off information without it sounding like a lecture. In a style like this that's trying to reflect everyday life, it can be even more glaring to spout out explanations and information. Now you can get around this if you're doing a documentary style that allows for interviews and talking heads, but you really don't have to. You don't even have to show all the events that are key to your plot. Stories need cause and effect, and if you tell a story and show the effect, the audience can figure out the cause for itself. Now granted, that's not as easy as it sounds. You've got to make sure the puzzle is clear enough to see the missing piece, but it is possible. Don't show a house getting broken into, show the family recording damage for insurance. If someone sees something horrible, they can shut down the camera like any sensible person would, and we can infer the potential reactions and effects from there. Now this all really helps if you consider our next tip. Number 3, limit yourself, aka take advantage of your disadvantages. Found footage movies are the cinematic equivalent to negative space in paintings. The overall image is composed largely of what you don't see, so it's important to limit what you can show. It can feel stifling to only have one shot from one camera at one angle. It sort of goes against the grain of how versatile film is, but it can really add a sense of vulnerability to your characters. When you try to overcome this limitation with having a giant crew with tons of cameras shooting from every possible angle, you're instead just filming a regular movie but in a lower quality. Instead, a single lingering tracking shot can be much more effective than every single person wearing a camera on their head just so you can shoot conversations like normal. A homemade camera can create a sense of intimacy. A field of security system night vision cameras posted in the middle of the jungle are not going to slip past the suspension of disbelief. Make it work for the tone of your film. A disadvantage can be turned into a supportive element in your story. Like our next tip. Number 4, justify the recording. Found footage movies simultaneously raise and lower our threshold for the implausible. It can be easier to feel the environment or atmosphere of a story, but it does raise issues that need to be addressed. Each and every frame of each and every scene needs a reason to exist. In standard filmmaking, you don't have to explain how you're seeing what's on the screen. It's just happening. But in a film like this, the camera is in the story. It takes up space, it has character, and it requires motivation, just like any other prop. It has to have a reason to be there and functioning, and by that I don't mean whatever excuse is given at the beginning of the movie, like a camera crew recording B-roll for a documentary, or a child enthusiastically recording a family vacation. There are tons of reasons to pull out a camera. We all do it all the time. What requires justification is why it continues to be filmed, and what's being filmed. Why is someone continuing to record their surroundings when they're running for their life?
You get cell phone reception, make that call, you get your ass back here. All right? Wait a minute.
I like Matt.
Right, Josh?
Why would someone record an intimate argument with a personal friend? Now there are a couple of lazy reasons you could come up with to do this, like someone simply forgot to turn off the camera, or they need the camera to be recording to use the light or night vision.
Charlie, I got my camera. It has an extra light on it.
But don't use that one. It's stupid and for the most part inaccurate. But if you come up with a reason that is actually creative, it can add to an aspect of your story. Take, for example, the reason used in the Blair Witch Project, of why the director continues to film despite prolonged raised emotional states.
Come on, man, you got her back. Good one.
No, she's still making movies, man. That's my point.
Please stop.
This is my point here.
It's all I fucking have left, okay?
It's all I got. Now, like the movie or not, that's a brilliant way to add to your character and motivate the recording at the same time. Number 5. If you find yourself designing a CGI creature at any time, you've gone too far. Okay, I've got to speed this up to get through this in time. So, CGI is great but often looks fake even at the best of times, and especially if you're in a low-budget film like found footage typically is. It never blends into a world that's trying to look as realistic as possible. It's a waste, don't do it, moving on. Number 6. Make sure your characters that know they're on camera, aka don't do anything illegal. Look, there's a physics term that says the very act of observing something can change it. Now they're talking about science, particle, mogwai after midnight things, but whatever, it's true with people too. When we see there's a camera around, we're hyper aware of it. We do our best to act accordingly. This is something to keep in mind about what should and shouldn't be said if you don't want it recorded, especially if it's illegal. It means someone who notices a camera isn't going to then, say, offer a government bribe to be able to trespass on a forbidden territory while it's recording.
Excuse me, guys. Guys, hold up. Restricted area.
Hey. How much you got in your wallet?
Or as another example, record breaking into a school to vandalize equipment. Or as another unrelated example, Record a black market arms transaction. I don't care how much you want to hunt Bigfoot, set down the camera before your arms deal. And that reminds me, no more movies about Bigfoot, aka trees are not scary. Okay, the Blair Witch takes place in a forest. Somehow that convinced a lot of movie makers that trees were somehow scary. Movies completely uninvolved with forest activity will suddenly have a scene with people getting lost in the woods, despite no consequence or buildup. Evil Things is a personal favorite film of the genre of mine, but it still has a 10-minute scene in the middle where the characters go for a walk and get lost in the woods and scream at each other, and then go home and continue without ever mentioning it again. I don't know if that's better or worse than replacing the Blair Witch with Bigfoot as an excuse for a scary woodland romp. Willow Creek, The Bigfoot Project, The Lost Coast Tapes, Exists, Hunting the Legend, Boggy Creek, Turtle Island, Pursuit of a Legend, Bigfoot County, and so many more. There are tons of these Bigfoot movies, and they don't even try to hide that it's a lazy excuse to do the Blair Witch Project. Like this.
Not you?
This is my home.
So, this is my home.
Yeah.
Which I am leaving the comforts of.
That I'm leaving the comforts of.
To explore the Blair Witch.
Film my documentary on Bigfoot.
It's not a good premise just because it's obvious. It just leaves you compared to an arguably superior film. Try something else. Moving on. Number 8. Make sure your script feels unscripted, but still uses script. Movies have a difficult time making dialogue sound natural, mostly because if it was genuinely natural, it would sound repetitive and everyone would talk over one another, and that's the nature of real-life conversation. So I've been told, I only know people from research, I've been told that my social skills are an impossible combination of awkward and robotic. I don't know how that is, robots aren't awkward. All that to say, it's understandable why some movies of this style would just give their actors general beats to hit, rather than an actual script. Unfortunately, when you do this, the movies typically come across as either blatantly ad-libbed, or they successfully sound like real-life conversation, which again is repetitive, chaotic, and difficult to follow, and in general not very entertaining. It can be tricky, but it's important to find that balance between realistic delivery and deliberate fiction. Number 9. Be consistent. I know this should be obvious as every movie, regardless of genre, needs some sort of consistency. But here, where you're challenging the audience to view it realistically, it's even more important. If your character is using a cheap camera, film with a cheap camera. If your character is using a cell phone camera,
Oh my god, what are we gonna do? Oh, it's so dark.
Don't give it night vision capabilities.
Night vision app.
If you start your movie as a found footage film, end as a found footage film. Don't record something without an explanation. I know this seems like something that shouldn't have to be said, but it seems like a lot of makers frequently forget it on these low-budget endeavors. Either they think they can sneak something in without the audience not noticing, or they just don't care. Either way, it'll undermine the movie's effectiveness, but not as much as our last tip. Number 10. Don't advertise. This isn't fully universal. A lot of these movies get released with no budget for publicity, but for those that do, less is more. The successful campaigns for this type of movie are those that support the narrative without actually showing clips from the movie. Anything from fake news reports about the story to showing audience reaction shots. Though admittedly, audience reaction trailers are typically for bad movies these days, but that sort of thing. Success doesn't come from selling the movie, it comes from selling the mystery. So there's my list. Now bear in mind that violating any of these rules doesn't make a movie necessarily bad. A good film of any genre has something stupid in it, we just don't notice or care because of the good surrounding it, and that's true here too. It's just a general outline. Or even a drinking game. Take a shot every time one of these rules is violated in a bad found footage movie. But following these rules will help with the style of these films, which is understated and subtle. Tune in next time when we look at a found footage movie by Michael Bay.